All right, let's get going with Keystone. Now, there's one thing I need to tell you in that we're going to be doing the backend in TypeScript. So don't get scared. I initially was going to do it all in just JavaScript because, especially for the front end, there's a little bit more of a hurdle to get up and running with it, and you have to know a lot about TypeScript and things like that. And while I'm a big TypeScript fan, I didn't necessarily think it was worth it for the front end just because I wanted everybody to do it. But I was looking at doing the backend in TypeScript because it's really not that much different than just regular .js files. And the sort of IntelliSense and the code highlighting or the code hinting that we get is going to be well worth our time in getting set up with it. So when we're working on the backend, all of our files are going to end in a .ts file. And then anytime we hit something weird, that is not like, let's look at this. Like, this is just JavaScript. Look at it. Everything in here is just JavaScript. There are going to be a few little spots in it where we have to type something. And if you've never done any TypeScript before, don't worry. I'm going to show you, okay, we add this little piece of code and here's the benefit that we get from it. So really just an extra maybe 3% on the project to get TypeScript, and you're going to see like, oh man, this is awesome. This is so worth doing. I understand why people like TypeScript so much. So I plan on having an entire TypeScript course come out and getting into the nitty-gritty of it, but quite honestly, Keystone does all of the hard TypeScript stuff. We just simply have to use it in .ts files, and all of that stuff comes along for free, which is pretty slick. So let's get up and running with Keystone. And you're going to have to watch, because I do this myself, is whenever we create new files in the backend, make sure you use .ts and not .js. So we'll go here, right click, new file, and we're going to call it keystone.ts. See, I typed a J there, TS. Got to catch myself. I'm sure I'm going to do that. If I do it more than 5 times in this course, I'll do something. I'll jump in the lake or something like that. Okay, so that is what we have so far. First thing we need to do is we need to import .env/config. And why that's important is because it's going to take all of the variables that we've put into our .env file. These are called environmental variables. These are variables that are set on our local machine. We're going to also set them again when we deploy it to an actual server. But that's going to make those variables in this file available to us inside of this keystone.js file. Next up, what we need to do is define what our database URL is. So say const database URL is equal to, and then how do we get it from this .env? Well, we say process.env dot, what did we call it? I like to just copy paste it so you don't accidentally goof anything up. Then we'll say or, and this is just a nice thing to do in case you're sending your code over to somebody else who has local install of it. We'll say MongoDB : //localhost / Keystone sick fits tutorial. And that will just fall back to localhost in case you don't have a database URL running there. Okay. Next thing we need to do is to create some session config. So we are going to be logging in to the Keystone backend. And in order to do that, in order to authenticate the users in the front end of our React application, we're going to use something called sessions. So what we do here is we say const session config is equal to curly brackets, and we say max age. This is going to be how long does the cookie. So it's going to set a cookie in our browser that has this thing called JWT. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. But basically, how long does the user stay signed in? And the answer to that is there's 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, and 30 days. This is the one you can change for how long. Maybe I'm going to do more, 360 days, because I hate when, how long should they stay signed in? Okay, that's good. Then the other thing we do is secret. So this is when you're generating the cookie, you need a secret. And that should not be available to anybody else. Otherwise, they'd be able to reverse engineer it. So we've put a secret right here, cookie secret. So say process.env.cookie secret. Good. Next thing we need to do is to import some methods from Keystone itself. So let's go up to the top here, and we are going to import two things: import curly brackets, config, and create schema. And that is going to go, oh, look at that. I just typed it in and it did it for us. So I'm going to use that one. And we'll go up here, and that is good. So we have import config and create schema from, and this might be a little bit different at Keystone next. This might just be at Keystone. And I will cut into the video right now when that changes. Or another way you can tell if that has changed is if you look at the package JSON. If you take a look here, you see these are all at Keystone next, and they will eventually change to either at Keystone or at Keystone JS. Again, you can tell what they are by looking at the dependencies in your package JSON. I will also cut into the video and tell you. That's just because this is currently in development mode while I'm recording this, but eventually it's going to be published on their main NPM branch, so no problem there. Okay, so import config and create schema. Then we'll go down here and we will export default config. And inside of that config, we have a whole lot of boilerplate. So bear with us on this one. I'll explain it as we go. It's not the most exciting stuff, but in the next video, we'll actually get into creating users and logging in and creating data types. So in this config, we have a couple properties. Actually, it's an object. So let's do an object there. And we have server, which is an object. Inside of that, we have cores, which is an object. And then we have the origin, and that is going to be HTTP localhost 7777. Actually, where do we have that? We don't need to manually do that. We can just say process.env.frontend_URL. And what that will allow us to do is, because we are running as backend on a different port than we're running on the front end, we need to be able to allow the data go from the back end to the front end. This won't be an issue when we actually deploy it, and I'll cover that then. But for now, we need that. And then we also want to say credentials is true. That means it will pass along that cookie that we just talked about creating when you create it. All right, next up we have is the database. And don't worry that this is red. That will go away once we've inputted all the data here. The database adapter is the first one we want. It's going to be Mongoose. You see, this is the huge benefit of using TypeScript. And this will often still happen in JavaScript files. But you see how I just typed it adapter? And it's like, well, I know the possible properties for this database is adapter, or I think there's URL as well. And like what is this, right? This is just random stuff it thinks you need, but the blue one is it knows what you want. So adapter, and then it knows the possible options are next, which they use for Postgres, or Mongoose. So we're going to say Mongoose. That's what they use under the hood. And then URL is going to be our database URL. That's the variable that we just created right here. Okay. And then we'll say, to add data seeding here. We'll get back to that. Now, next is the data types. Keystone refers to our data types as lists: a list of users, a list of products, a list of items, a list of orders, things like that. So we'll say lists is equal to a create schema, and we have an object. We're going to leave that empty, but we're going to say schema items go in here. Then the next one we say UI. Do you want people to be able to access this UI? Because in some applications, you don't want to give access to this. You want people to manage all of the data from the actual front end of their application. So we are going to, right now, we're going to say true, but then when we hit permissions and roles, we'll come back and change that. So let's put a little to do in there. To do, change this for roles. We'll say, is access allowed? We'll say true. Okay. Oh, we're getting a little arrow here, and it looks like it's expecting a function that can be run to validate the current session should have access to. Okay, so this should be a function. So let's just make a function that returns true. Okay, good. Again, we'll come back to that. And then the last thing we want to do, let's just put it to do add session values here. So there's a lot in here that we're going to come back to do. But for now, let's just get the minimal up and running. I'm getting some red here, and that is just because the Keystone package that we're using hasn't been updated for this just yet. So it's not expecting a server property with cores on it, but just know that that's okay. One thing you can do is you can just do a little thing and you say @ts ignore, and that will just ignore that coming URL. Okay, so I don't think that this is going to work just yet, but let's try it. Open up your terminal. And we're going to make sure we are in our backend folder, and we run npm run dev. That's going to in turn run the Keystone command, and it says dev server running on localhost 3000. Okay, good. Keystone is loading. Ready. Boom. There it is. There's nothing here. You can't even log in because we haven't even made a concept of a user yet. But that's just to show that our config has not yet been broken. So the next thing that we need to do is to create our actual users so we can sign into this thing. Now let's go ahead and do that in the next video.